AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What ALLEN and Ande Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.
Hey everyone, Ande Anderson here, co-founder of AVAIYA University with my partner ALLEN. Thank you so much for joining us for our Breaking Free from Toxic Relationships curriculum. We have a great class lined up for you next with Dr. Rhonda Freeman. She's back with us to talk about how to shift your brain away from toxic relationships. Rhonda is a neuropsychologist, so she talks a lot about neuroscience and how that relates to our attachment style and how our brain works as it relates to relationships and attracting toxic relationships and whatnot. We talk a lot about a lot of things, including how does she define toxic relationships. We talk about, actually her story of being in a toxic relationship and how she developed PTSD and had a lot of really hard struggles and how she was able to literally train her brain out of that cycle. We also talk about different traits to look out for in toxic partnerships and specifically related to narcissistic abuse because that is her specialty. And then we dive a lot into why it seems to be harder for people who are in a toxic relationship to leave than a normal, so to speak, normal or regular relationship. And I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit before we begin. So it's right. We are human beings. And in order to keep our species moving forward, there are certain ways that our brain works in order to survive, in order to keep procreation happening and all of that stuff. And Rana talks a lot about this neurochemistry of love. So just take a look at your life and how the neurochemistry of love has played a role in your life and played a role in the kinds of partners you've had, played a role in the current partnership you have and those kinds of things. The brain has so much to do with the people that we choose and the relationships we end up getting into, as well as our childhoods. Our childhood, if we had trauma or we had, maybe narcissistic parents or things like that, all of those things take, play a role in who we decide to be with later in life. So just some things to think about as you dive into this class. And also, if you didn't see Rhonda's class in our Overcoming Narcissistic Abuse curriculum, I highly recommend that. She dives even deeper into specifically narcissistic abuse and how to recover from that. So if you haven't watched that, that is at the homepage of AVAIYA.com, and enjoy the class, everyone. Welcome, AVAIYA family. Thank you so much for joining us for our Breaking Free from Toxic Relationships curriculum. I'm Ande Anderson. My partner, ALLEN, and I are teachers, mentors, and the co-owners of AVAIYA University. AVAIYA is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you, as always, for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Dr. Rhonda Freeman, is back with us today to talk about how to shift your brain away from toxic relationships. Rhonda is a neuropsychologist. She works with patients diagnosed with neurological conditions and is involved in clinical research trials for Alzheimer's disease. She's also a contributor to Psychology Today, where she educates people on topics like personality disorders and trauma. And she's also the founder of Neuro Instincts, which is a neuroscience-based website dedicated to helping survivors of narcissistic abuse. So thanks so much for being back with us, Rhonda.
Oh, thanks for having me, Ande.
Yeah, it's good to see you again. I'm so glad that we could continue on the conversation from our Overcoming Narcissistic Abuse event. And since this is your forte, the toxic relationship, let's dive in. So like, what do you, in your experience and your expertise, like what are toxic relationships to you?
Yeah, I always view them from the personality disorder end. And I'm sure there are lots of different kinds of people who can behave, let's say, toxically in a relationship. But usually when I use that word, I'm referencing people who have a personality disorder. So it's a very unchangeable pattern of behavior. And they violate other people because of their symptoms. So they're not respectful. They don't have the ability to be compassionate or empathic or kind, even moral oftentimes. So they'll have a lot of moral violations in the relationship because all relationships are going to have their ups and downs. That's expected for people, but they always cross the line. So there's often betrayal, sometimes cheating, lying, gaslighting. All those things are not within a normal context of a typical ordinary interaction. Exactly. It's not normal at all. So somebody is usually in a dominant position. Someone's usually walking on eggshells so as to not, ignite their bad behaviors. So it's never a peaceful, calm, mutual relationship is what I consider a toxic relationship.
Yeah. I like that you put in the word mutual too, because it's not like really, I guess, like a partnership at all.
No, it's
If like
not.
one end is, at least one end is toxic. So, awesome. Thank you for sharing your definition of toxic relationships. And I'd love it if you'd share a little bit about your story. So like, have you personally been in a toxic relationship? And if you have, would you be comfortable telling us a little bit about that?
Yeah, definitely. For a while, I wasn't comfortable because I feel ashamed about it. But yeah, it was a relationship that it changed my life, I'll say, because it showed me the power of the brain and how much someone else's pathology can actually change my own ability to function in the realm of normal. I was always pretty regulated and really just happy and peaceful with the typical ups and downs that everybody had. But this individual came into my life and none of those resources were available to me anymore about myself. Like I couldn't find peace. I couldn't be calm. He had me on edge. I went from somebody who was really confident, not arrogant, because that's not a part of my traits, but I was really confident and I loved instilling that confidence in other people. And it was like a dark like cloud came over me and it was all gone, because he just kept chipping away at who I was, what my personality was. This guy, he was on a pathological narcissism spectrum and just a lot of rage within him, a lot of anger. And yeah, he put me through the ringer, it was a really tough relationship and I'm just so glad I'm done. But because of that relationship, I was able to shift neuropsych into this area here.
Yeah.
I do regular neuropsych 9 to 5, but then after that, I jump into the online world because I really try to educate people, because if I can help anybody not go through what I went through, or if they have gone through it, then to kind of help them through it, then I feel like I've contributed in the right way. Because if I have this special ability, which is, the whole neuroscience thing that I work really hard to earn, why not use it in this way to help other people?
Awesome. Thank you. I appreciate you sharing a little bit about your story. I think it's so helpful for our viewers and people watching who are going, obviously they probably are part of some kind of toxic relationship or trying to get out of one if they're watching this right now. So I know it's always helpful to hear, personal stories of success and also just like the amazingness of you being able to then turn it into something that you can help people, turning in our greatest challenges into something great. So what else could you tell us a little about characteristics of a toxic partner? Like, I know you mentioned things like gaslighting and things like that. Anything else that like common traits that people could maybe identify as toxic?
Yeah, again, often it's the narcissism pathology types of individuals. So, they're not loving, they're not warm, but they disarm and harm us in very different ways because there are different types of narcissists. Are not all the same. Like you have some that are like the love fraud ones. They actually manipulate and harm their partners through the whole process of love. And on the outside looking in, some people will say, "You got the greatest guy. He brings donuts to the office. He tells the best jokes. Everybody loves him, But then with you behind closed doors, you're getting to see the rages and the coldness and the anger. And if you were to tell anybody about this and say, Jack, I'm just making up a name here, Jack is really giving me a hard time. I don't know how I'm going to keep making it with this guy. No one will believe you because I think Jack's fantastic. So that would be like the histrionic narcissist. Mm-hmm. They have the most amazing mask. And if, let's say, push comes to shove and they ever have to get confronted with their bad behavior, then they often do a lot of, I'm the victim. Poor me, why am I going through this? It's like, whoa, it's me. They're very dramatic. Then you have the other end of the type of narcissist who's a malignant narcissist. They can't pull off what the histrionic narcissist does at all. They cannot charm you with their sweetness, and the honeys and the sweet, because they aren't built that way. They're more the intimidators, so they demand out front that you pay attention to what they're saying and you do what they say and you cross them. So they're very cold and callous right out front. If anyone were to hear from you that John is being harsh with me, it wouldn't shock anybody. I said, well, I was trying to tell you about John. And so these people are violators, and because they have problems with what we consider to be the social neural networks of our brain, because we have different neural networks. We have some that handles like thinking, memory, and those kinds of things. Then we have neural networks that's solely dedicated to our social abilities. And because they have such problems with those neural networks, you're not going to see all the things you would expect. Like they're not warm, they're not loving, they're not empathic. They can only do superficial level of social skills, like having manners. That's very superficial level. Please, thank you, kind of thing. Thank you is a little bit tied to being grateful and appreciative. So you may not even hear a thank you. Thank you only because, let's say if it's in a context like at work or something and you pass them a paper, they'll say thank you. But yeah, they can only pull off the superficial, not the deep. And the deep involves a lot of different neural pathways associated with empathy and compassion and appreciation and gratefulness. Those are missing. How can you have a relationship with somebody with those things missing? You cannot.
Got it.
So yeah, that's what I consider the characteristics of the toxic partner. Yeah, they can do superficial, they can't do deep, and they can bring a lot of pain.
And it's interesting too, like what you said between the two different like types you were just describing is like what the outward world might think of one person, right? Who on the outward level looks like so fabulous and charming and whatever. Yeah. And then the opposite of that obviously is it's very obvious that, okay, no, I wouldn't want to date that person.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So like, what about ending a relationship with a toxic person? Obviously you've gone through this and you help, coach people through this process. So like, why, I guess from like a neuroscience level, or like, why is it harder for people to leave like a toxic relationship than one that would be like a normal, pseudo-normal, regular relationship?
Yeah. That crazy thing, Andy, wouldn't you think it'd be easier? Like, wouldn't you think right. This guy was terrible? Like, yeah, you're going to leave him and goodbye, good riddance, and, peace out. But it is actually often, not always, often harder. And I'm not talking about the non-medical stuff. Like, for example, because you have children together or because the finances are tied together. Yeah, those things are going to keep you tied to a partner. But I'm speaking solely about neuro and psychology. And so it's harder because, we got the one thing going on. The one thing is the neurochemistry of love. The neurochemistry of love is associated with actually having a partner addiction. And that is completely normal because that's how the brain actually makes sure that we connect and we procreate, and continue our species. So you got to have sort of this kind of addiction of your partner. And if they're not around, you miss them and you want them and you yearn for them and you love them. That's the complete normal love process. And so when we break up, for whatever reason, we decide, we're probably not great for each other. So you go your separate ways. It still hurts a little bit. Yeah. Because, your brain's like, I don't want to detach. I don't like, this person's, we had experiences together. We did things together. So that's the normal relationship breakup. And it still hurts and it's still difficult. So the survivor has that on their plate. They also have the neurobiology often associated with rejection if they were with a toxic partner, because people on the pathological narcissism spectrum are all about rejection almost every day. And by that, I mean, they can pull the silent treatment on you. They cannot validate you when you're saying something. They're always going to use little microaggressions. They may not want to hear what you have to say, or you may have gotten dolled up really nice for his work event, let's say, and he's about to take you and you say, okay, what do you think? You like how I look? And he may look up from his phone, nothing. And you feel kind of stupid, humiliated, so they ramp up that section of the brain. And what we know about rejection does two things. It ramps up three things. It ramps up our pain system. We have a part of the brain called the insula that is responsible for generating pain. And so it ramps up that, which is not good. It actually also ramps up our bonding system, believe it or not. It makes us feel more sort of tuned in to the rejector. But the brain does that because, like back in the days of tigers and bears and us, and if we are rejected by our social group, it could be life or death, so it makes you pay attention to, whoa, why did I get rejected here? Let me, fix that, focus on that because my survival depends on it. Well, we got these old sections of the brain and the newer sections of the brain in action, and the older sections don't understand logic. So it gives you more focus on this person who is rejecting you. And then of course it ramps up the stress system because now you're even being more hyper vigilant of trying to avoid those, because we don't want to have pain. So we're doing things to avoid igniting those painful experiences. So the survivor has the neurobiology of love, neurobiology of rejection going on. That's not it.
That's not it.
We're not done yet.
There's more.
Yeah. The survivor has the neurobiology of the traumatic bonding oftentimes. So traumatic bonding is when you're with a person who doesn't have a consistent level of behavior, because sometimes they behave really badly. And I don't mean badly in the normal realm, but badly like out here, that betrayal stuff I talked about, the lying, the gaslighting, all those things are not normal. But then sometimes they can be funny and calm, and they can be nice, because I mean, you know, like even serial killers can be funny, you know. So it's not like a person is, you know, a psychopath or a malignant narcissist and they're completely in that nasty, hateful mode 100% of the time. No, they can actually be entertaining and funny and a little bit likable, you know. And so you've got this person who you've seen the worst of towards you, but then you get to see, wow, I like this guy because of all these other things. So all that mixed up chemistry is happening. And so they have ignited your bonding system, making you feel really connected to them because you care about them. They're part of you now because of the bonding system, but they're also traumatizing you at the same time. So you've got the traumatic bond going on. Some people, when they're in these relationships, the abuse is so bad and it's so dangerous that they have developed PTSD or complex PTSD. Now you're in a decompensated version of yourself, and you're not at the same way that you came into the relationship. So it's going to be harder for you to sort of advocate for yourself, to fight for yourself, because you're just trying to make it through the day and not be triggered and not have the intrusive thoughts and the flashbacks, the symptoms of PTSD. Some people have complex PTSD, which means that the abuse has gone on for a while and the brain almost adapts to it. And the stress system actually starts to react in a different way, and it makes you a muted version of yourself. So it's almost like you're in this chronic state of it's like a chronic state of stress, but it's not the stress of the pure PTSD. That's a little bit more reacting immediately to a flashback or an intrusive thought. This is this chronic, slow, dull pain that has actually just taken your whole personality to a different level. So that's another thing. We're at like 4 or 5 things at this point. And then the attachment style comes in, because our attachment style with this person is really important, because the people who have more of the insecure styles, they are going to suffer more, because often their viewpoint is on the outside of self versus towards, the end of self. So because they're so much paying attention to how that narcissist is behaving, they're not taken in that, wow, I am being treated like complete trash here. And who does this person think he is? You know, where they may have, and interestingly, a narcissist can take a secure attachment into an insecure attachment. You know, a person can actually switch, because these are not set in stone. Our attachment styles can change, and it can be different for different people. So even a securely attached person can bind themselves into these relationships, and because that person has chipped away, the psychopath or narcissist, so long that now they sort of shifted into this insecure style, and they're focused on this other person. And so so anyway, that's so much more than what's on the plate of the person with a normal relationship. Because if you're with a normal man or woman, they are not going to give you PTSD. They're not going to give you all this, the rejection. All that stuff is very abnormal, you know, so you're not going to see any of that. So all they have to deal with is, I miss this person, but you know what? I wish them well and I'm on my way. Or good riddance, they were a real jerk. I'm glad I'm gone. You know, but then that's it. But as you see, you got so many things on the plate of the person who is a survivor. Yeah. And that's why it's so hard.
Yeah, I'm so glad you went into such detail with that, Rhonda, because it makes, I just feel so much compassion, and for people watching, I know a lot of people tend to like judge themselves or feel shameful about like having it be hard to difficult to leave and stuff. And God, there's so much going on. There's so much in our brain that's like happening that would make perfect sense why it's difficult. So you mentioned trauma, you mentioned PTSD. I know you also in your work talk a little bit about like childhood trauma. Like, is there a connection between people who grew up in traumatic environments, and then is it more likely that they find themselves in, I guess, toxic relationships as adults, or how does that whole thing work?
Sometimes this is stance in psychology that you kind of go and you recreate what you grew up in. So sometimes that can happen. Or sometimes you just happen across a narcissist and they can detect all that huge amount of empathy and compassion and caregiving that you have. Because often many people who were abused as a child, one of the things abuse does is it allows us to have such compassion for other people, and it ramps up the stress system in such a way that you care about how you treat people, you pay attention to what you say, and you can feel their pain. And so the person who has the childhood of abuse, they often are able to actually see the pain even of the narcissist, and because of that, they often are in these relationships. And the bad thing though about for the person who has childhood abuse, which always breaks my heart when I have to talk about it, but is that, let's say they were violated in whatever way by a parent or caregiver. It can be, emotionally, psychologically, physically, sexually. And so the brain is put through an extreme amount of stress. When we are children, our brain obviously is not fully developed yet. It's not developed, well at all. And there's the prefrontal cortex, which is the regulator of our brain here. It needs all the way through adulthood for it to finish its proper development. And if you are 3 or 4 or 7 or 10 or 12 and you're getting violated, that's the very system of the brain you need in place to calm down that stress system. So the stress system is going to be reacting to all this awful, all these awful violations that are happening to you without any form of protection of a frontal lobe to kind of cool it down, because your stress system has to be on high alert to scan the environment, making sure that person's not around or is still thinking about the trauma, because there's PTSD. So you have a brain, taking that brain into adulthood without a fully developed prefrontal cortex that is there to calm you and regulate you. And by the way, you don't catch up unless you do some kind of healing work. That prefrontal cortex doesn't catch up. It just kind of stays stunted in that way when it comes to regulating emotions. And so that's why you often see people who are adults with childhood trauma say that they feel so sensitive and they feel things more intensely than other people. Or if something small happens, they get really upset about it, because even that small thing is too much for them to handle. Or they get upset, but they can't calm it down really easily, where they'll be around a friend and say, oh, that's no big deal, just let that go. They say, I wish I could just for some reason, I cannot do that. I cannot just let it go. It's stuck with me. So, but through healing work, thankfully, thanks to neuroplasticity, a person who has gone through childhood trauma can actually help those frontal lobes catch up through different, interventions with a specialist.
Awesome. Thank you for diving into that. And I think it's so important for people to get how it can stunt you. I mean, that's such good information to know, even though it's not necessarily easy to know, right? But okay, wow, it never developed, right? As it should. And obviously just the inspiration and hope to have, healing that people can work through those childhood traumas and be able to heal. So let's talk a little bit about healing. So from a neuroscience perspective, how can people harness this information about the brain and how it works, and how can they use that to help themselves heal from trauma from a toxic relationship?
Yeah, this is my favorite. Well, I guess it is because I write about it all the time. This is my favorite subject because I went through such a hard time, and you think, well, wait, weren't you trained in this? Shouldn't you know? No. I went through such a hard time. So after my relationship, I think I met criteria for PTSD because I was having a lot of intrusive thoughts, nightmares. I couldn't sleep. Thoughts of him would just wake me up at night with just sheer panic because my guy was a psychopath and he was pretty scary. So once this relationship was over, I went to a psychologist, and what I didn't check or didn't even know, because we didn't really use these terms back then. We didn't use narcissistic abuse and those kinds of things. There was no thing, and she was kind of like old school. She was of, well, had you were not exposed to any trauma that put your life in danger. So PTSD was never even on the table as a consideration for me. She just thought, you went through a bad breakup, let's talk about the breakup. And so she had me rehash every week what happened, what upset me, what about him, And, looking back, I think, oh my God, my poor brain, because, when you're going through healing, it is really not necessary to go over the specific infractions of what that person did. I remember having to recall conversations and tell her about the conversations, and he said this, and then I said that. And, it was just really odd. It was because it's not necessary. Had I gone to a trauma-informed psychologist, she would have known not to handle me in that way. Or had I gone to a neuropsych treatment person, they would have known not to handle me in that way, because all that does is activate my connection with him. I was still just keeping it, nice and strong, because I was always taught it was always him, always him, always him. But she wasn't helping me to shift into me. Let's talk about what you can do to help you feel better and do better. And so because of that, it was just always about this guy. And so anyway, I was with her for a little bit, and I realized I was getting worse. I was getting much worse. I started to dread Wednesdays, I gotta go see this lady. Yep. And then I don't know, one day I was at work and I'm like sitting there like, you freaking have a PhD, girl. And I'm like, yeah, you're not a therapist, but if you could just conceptualize this case, what would you say to her? And I would say, she shouldn't be doing this, she shouldn't be that. I started laying out what she shouldn't be doing. Mm-hmm. What would you tell her to do? And this is what I started realizing, wow, I can actually use what I know regarding neuroplasticity to help my own brain. Because when I graduated with my PhD, I went to a fellowship, and the fellowship was focused on two things. It was focused on dementia, Alzheimer's, because that's actually my specialty in real life, is dementia, Alzheimer's. But it was focused also on cognitive rehabilitation. So I spent a lot of time with brain trauma and stroke victims, doing different brain trainings with them to try to help get them towards, back towards their old status. And so knowing that, I thought, wouldn't this work with emotions? Same brain, same concepts. And the same area that I work with those individuals are the area I need right now to help me, which is my prefrontal cortex. It was in sort of a dull mode. I was able to do my job, but it was in a dull mode as far as regulating me, because I would still go home and cry and have the intrusive thoughts and all those things. And so yeah, I said to myself, all right, I put it really big on the paper, activate those prefrontal cortex as much as I can. And so I would do things like mindfulness training. And that's when you engage in different strategies that bring your attention to the now. I would take mindfulness walks where I would give attention to what's around me without judging. And what that does is it activates our prefrontal cortex. I would do things like movement. So I used to be a dancer. And so I love the whole choreographed movements where you have to follow a teacher, the whole in 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 kind of stuff. What that does is it activates the prefrontal cortex along with different areas of the brain, but we have what's called our motor strip in the frontal lobes. That's what allows us to move. And sequencing has to take place when you're doing the choreographed dance. Because I can't have my arm here and the class has their foot, there and their arm there, I have to be right with the class. So doing that activated my prefrontal cortex, and also playing brain games activated my prefrontal cortex. And so I chose specific games that I sort of investigated and tagged those games as being activators of my prefrontal cortex. Mm. And so I did that for over a year. And this is what I got.
Here's the result, everybody.
Yeah. So yeah, because I was not, just to think I would have been, I think I could have still been suffering. It's very possible if you're just, because we don't have, our brain is not like a bucket. It's not a get it out kind of organ, like the more you talk about it, you dump all of that out. It's not like that. It's a deactivation activation system. So you activate the neural pathways associated with that partner. Well, they're not going to have a chance to fade away.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing all of your different tools and stuff that you used in your own personal journey, and then just ideas for, people and what they could apply in their own life. And so I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about your gift and your program. And everybody watching, there's a couple buttons beneath this video that link over to Rhonda's site. So what do you have for us?
Well, my free gift is that I revamped this little booklet that I made for you guys, and it's called this 7 Steps Toward Healing. And so just in it, it sort of has you make sure that you make sure that you're paying attention to a few things in your life that you could use as self-care healing, not like, obviously official with a psychologist, but self-care healing types of things that you want to be doing along your journey that you could help yourself. Because I think it's always great, even when you're working with a psychologist, to do some of the self-care things on your own, because, your brain is with you all the time.
Right.
And so when you have the opportunity to activate it in certain ways, definitely do so. And then there's my course. And in the course, I talk, matter of fact, not just talk, I walk you through the different ways that you can activate your brain, and sort of step by step, and with some worksheets. And I sort of quiz and query you in worksheet form about whether or not certain parts of your brain are overactive that could be creating some symptoms for you. And then I also describe in great detail, maybe a little bit too much, what's happening in certain brain systems, chemistry, just the whole gamut, because we're going to try to just guide you through this whole narcissistic abuse experience. And it's solely focused on narcissistic abuse. So it's not like a general trauma class. It's not even for people who, let's say, I've gone through childhood abuse, I want to take this. This is solely for the individuals who were in a romantic relationship.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Thank you. Awesome. And thank you for going into great detail on all of that. So I'm sure it'll be super helpful for people. And again, everybody, there's those buttons below that link over to Rhonda's site. Do you have any last insights? Anything else you feel like we've left out, or anything else you want to talk about before we wrap up?
Maybe self-awareness. I think that one's a real big one in healing in general. This is not like a neuroscience thing or not. It just that, when you're healing, you're going to be learning a lot about yourself. And when you are learning, try not to judge it, because I know that a lot of us who've been with a narcissist, we are very, we may be a little hard on ourselves, and we are like the type A often, we're the achievers, we're the guys and girls who get stuff done. And so if we have little patches of, I did this, I did that, we might accidentally judge it, but don't judge it, just learn, just know. And that's who you are, and that's completely okay, because there's no perfect human. There's some people who they go through my course and they think, my goodness, I think that I have an insecure attachment style based on what you explained. And they feel like they actually will feel badly about that. And I'm like, don't feel badly about that. Like it just is. And if it's causing you some difficulties or limitations, or you decided now you're so scared to go back out there in a relationship because of this, make sure that you get to a professional who's going to just know you, learn about your system, and help you through that. And so self-awareness is just a really great mindset. Be ready for it, because healing's going to bring it on, and be ready for it, and don't judge it.
Awesome. Thank you. Perfect last words of wisdom. Thanks, Rhonda. I really appreciate you.
You're welcome, Andy.
Doing this again. It was great to reconnect with you, and thank you for all your wisdom, and everyone watching. Thank you so much for showing up for yourself. It takes a lot to just show up to, this event and these conversations to really dive into this. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you again soon. Take care. Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us for this latest class with Dr. Rhonda Freeman. We talked about how to shift your brain away from toxic relationships. I really love this conversation. I thought Rhonda did such a beautiful job of explaining to us how the brain works, and why it's so important to understand the workings of our brain in order to heal from unhealthy relationships, and just the hope and inspiration that it is possible, right? She is this testament of a person who went through a really toxic, unhealthy relationship and was able to actually retrain her brain through all sorts of different techniques that she described, mindfulness, all sorts of different things in order to overcome that toxic relationship trauma. So this is also possible for you. So I just hope that you really take her words and hope and inspiration and tools on in your own life. And thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again real soon. Take care.
AVAIYA has changed my life.
AVAIYA has made me the woman I am today.
AVAIYA is my home.
AVAIYA is personal freedom.
AVAIYA is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about AVAIYA.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, AVAIYA, for appearing in my inbox.
What ALLEN Ande Anderson have created at AVAIYA is what the world needs.